The winner is surprisingly easy to find because... Hey guys, this is JP's LEGO Reviews. Today, I'm going to compare the LEGO Creator Expert James Bond Aston Martin DB5, set number 10262, to the Harley Davidson Fatboy, also from Creator Expert, set number 10269. So, we're going to compare today the displayability, realism, value proposition, and the building experience of these sets. So let's compare it down. Now, when it comes to displayability, what LEGO set is actually better to display? Now, in my opinion, the better set to display actually is the Harley Davidson. The reason why is because there's just visually more going on. Now, there are different types of product, motorbike versus a car, but with the motorcycle, you just get to see a lot more things than you would in the car. You get to see the pistons, and you get to see the inner workings of a Harley Davidson, which make it look good. Meanwhile, there are details from the Aston Martin DB5 that do show a little bit of how it works, but it is rather boring and it's not that interesting to look at. But now, let's move on to the realism factor of these two sets. Now, when it comes to the realism of these two sets, which LEGO set right here is more realistic? Well, I have to say, they're both equally realistic, and the reason why I say this is because even though the Aston Martin technically does have less detailing than the Harley Davidson, overall they are both equally realistic because on the outside the Harley Davidson does have more detail than the Aston, and they both are recreated at a relatively realistic level. But now, let's look at the value proposition of these two sets. Now, when it comes to the value proposition of these two sets, which LEGO set, in my opinion, has a better value? Well, the Aston Martin set retailed for 230 Australian dollars, meanwhile the Harley Davidson retailed for 160. Now, the Harley Davidson is taller and actually I think a little bit longer, but is far more narrow. But in my opinion, the better valued set is actually the Harley Davidson. The reason why is because for $70, you don't feel like you're getting a lot more. Yes, the Aston Martin set is a lot more heavier, which does help when it comes to the feeling of value, but because of the size of the Harley Davidson, it basically looks, and it makes it, compared to the Aston Martin when you're not lifting them both, it makes it look like a far better value for money, and it maybe even makes it look like it's worth close to the same price, even though it's quite a lot more thinner, lighter, and just less big in general than the Aston Martin, but it conveys the sense of value compared to the Aston Martin, which is why it's the better valued set out of these two. But now, let's move on to the building experience of these two sets. Now, what LEGO set here is a better building experience? Well, they're both quite intriguing builds because with the Harley Davidson, you get to see how it's built, but you also see how most of the things that you build still happen to be visible after it's built. Meanwhile, with the Aston Martin, I think it's a richer building experience, not just because you build more things, but because you get to add secret functions and small Easter eggs that are built that are later covered up by the car that you otherwise wouldn't get with the Harley Davidson. And that makes it a more intriguing building experience because you're building something that you know of, but that may not be easily visible to someone looking at the set. But now, let's move on to my final thoughts on this comparison. Now, what are my final thoughts on these two LEGO sets right here? Well, between the Aston Martin DB5 and the Harley Davidson Fatboy, the winner is surprisingly easy to find because it's a better value for money and it makes for a far more interesting display set, which is the Harley Davidson Fatboy. The reason why this LEGO set simply wins in this comparison is this motorcycle has a lot more detail and it's far more interesting to actually display, but it's also better value for money than the Aston Martin DB5. Now, the DB5 specifically is quite a boring car to look at, especially the way that LEGO made it, but even in real life, it's not the most interesting car that's ever been built. And what makes it interesting is more the fact that it's been in James Bond rather than the fact that it's an actually interesting vehicle. Also, with the Harley Davidson, it's a great color scheme and simply it just looks better on display apart from just being better value. And the building experience, even though the Aston Martin does have a better building experience, it isn't leagues ahead to make it basically an uncomparable product. It still doesn't make the Aston Martin the winner by really any meaningful margin. And out of these two, if I were to get one, I would definitely get the Harley Davidson. But with all the Creator Expert vehicles that I actually own, my favorite isn't actually the Harley Davidson, but the Mustang. So it's not necessarily saying that motorcycles are better than cars, it's just that this motorcycle happens to be this car in this comparison. Now, let me know what your thoughts are down below. If you want to see more content just like this, please subscribe. I hope you guys have a great day and keep building.